Hi, I'm Palacetonia, but you can just call me Tony. I am excited to talk about the various media that I like using this YouTube channel as a vehicle for such thoughts. But first, I would like to give a very short spiel about how I view media critique using only this apple. And let's just say for the sake of discussion that you have never eaten an apple before. Now, the apple is a piece of media, a work, a text, but the skin on the apple is basically what your first impression of the text is going to be. So you see, this apple is red, and it's got the stem on it too. The skin on a piece of media, like a work or a text, or say more specifically, a movie, a video game, a comic book, it could be the cover of such things, or it could also be the trailer, any promotional or marketing material. And if any of those things happen to not appetize you, like say the little splotches of brown on this apple, you could even see there's a little nick here, but for the most part it is an edible looking apple. When you take a bite of an apple, and god, I'm hungry because I haven't eaten breakfast for this video. So when you take your first bite of an apple, you immediately notice the flesh inside of the apple isn't red, it's yellow. A very light yellow in spots, slightly darker yellow in others. That's just like when you first take your own deep dive into a piece of media. Like when you're seeing a movie for the first time, when you're playing a video game for the first time. Among other things, you can take note that the apple, it tastes sweet, it's juicy, and the flesh is crunchy to chew on. And depending on what kind of apple you eat, your experience might be slightly different. The skin could be green or gold, depending on what breed of apple it is. Or the flesh inside might not be yellow, but it could be closer to white. And it could taste tart rather than sweet. And just as I mentioned before, eating an apple is kind of like when you experience a work for the very first time. And depending on what kind of media you're consuming, the experience might be slightly different. And obviously different genres of media offer different kinds of experiences, from action and horror to slice of life and comedy and all the combinations in between. And some of the time, if you eat enough, you make it far enough into the apple that at some point you're going to reach the core. And at that point, you would also have made it to the end of the story that you're experiencing and what medium that it's being written for. At the core could be the message or the meaning behind the work, what the author is trying to say. And sometimes people will be satisfied with just reaching the ending. But if you're an obsessive weirdo like me, sometimes that's not enough. And sometimes you might not even make it to the core before you decide to throw the whole apple out. But see, all of that is just about consuming the apple, like consuming a piece of media. Get it? You could get a full experience from eating an apple, but like I mentioned before, sometimes that's just not enough for people like me. And that is where critique comes in. And critique can be likened to dividing a piece of media into little pieces so that they could be a bit more easy to digest. Just like how I'm going to slice what I haven't eaten of this apple with a knife. Goddamn mosquitoes, I swear to God. You could take note of how the apple slice looks. You could see the different pores in the flesh. You could take a look at how many dots there are on the skin. You can even see that there's little slices of the core there. Wow. Who would have guessed? When you're taking note of all of these traits about the apple slice, you're trying to gather little bits of information so that you can make some kind of conclusion about the apple. And these slices are the specific topics that you choose to cover when you're doing media analysis. These topics range from plot structure to symbology and whatever mental illness a protagonist might have. Those kinds of videos. But the point is ultimately to see what makes the work tick, what makes it good or bad, what the person that's critiquing it, like you, what you like about it or dislike about it, in order to draw a conclusion or come up with an interesting interpretation. And this interpretation could also be used for marketing the work before it's even released if you happen to have a review copy. And from where I'm standing, this is a pretty tasty slice of apple. And as you eat more apples, you could be likened to watching more movies, reading more comics, just to gather notes on what each of those media entail, especially if you're reading or experiencing other kinds of different texts that are in the same series. You're seeing how the conventions play out in them. And if I were to go back inside of my house right now and get some caramel or peanut butter to smother on the slices, it's kind of like you're adding your own ideas and experiences to your interpretation of the work. But you gotta be careful not to completely obfuscate the point that you're trying to make. Just like how, if you put too much peanut butter on the apple, how much of the apple is there left to taste? A lot of amateur critics on YouTube seem to go on lots of tangents that say, this is about a thing that I did last week in the grocery store, or it reminds me of a thing that I did at my job, and it becomes some sort of like a verbal Family Guy cutaway gag. But yeah, a lot of these times these tangents can obfuscate or distract from the point that you're trying to make. And the effect then is that whether by stream of consciousness or just a lack of professional experience with critique, going on these tangents, unless you find some way to hook it back to the main point, oftentimes they're just a distraction. Now, when you core an apple using a specific device or just a knife like I'm doing, if all you're doing is coring the apple, you're kind of just getting to the center of the apple without having first experienced the act of eating it first. You remove a lot of the experience that you would have had if you had just eaten it by hand. And that could be like making a snap judgment on a comic book that you've never read before just based on some hearsay. Or, you read a wiki page on a character and that page spoils their entire involvement with the plot. Or it could be when you refund a game on Steam just because you played it for 30 minutes and you find that it doesn't really run all that well on your computer, or that the gameplay is too hard, and then you refund it. Any way you slice it, you're kind of just jumping to a conclusion before you really have a chance to gather evidence in order to justify that conclusion, i.e. knocking something before you try it. On a similar note, watching someone else eat an apple like you're doing right now with me, it's a second-hand experience. And if you've never eaten an apple before, I could stand here describing how the thing tastes and how it feels to eat it all day long. Through empathy, you might experience the same thing too, but to maybe a lesser degree, because, you're not really in the moment here with me. And that's like watching a live stream of a video game that you've never played before. Perhaps you might not even plan to experience it yourself. That's perfectly fine. But you could also be a seasoned Apple consumer that just wants to watch me eat this thing for your sick kicks, or to remember your first time that you ate an apple. And sometimes watching someone else eat an apple might make you want to eat one. Again, humans are creatures of empathy and all. And to close out this essay, I'm gonna cycle back to the rotten and unripe apple examples that I gave earlier, and also film it from my dining room, because summer is a low-tier season due to all the mugginess and heat and the insects. You could see the mosquito bite on my cheek, but fuck that. Fuck all of that. Let's do this. A rotten or an overripe apple can spoil an entire bushel due to emitting an ethylene gas that accelerates aging in other apples, thus causing them to go bad too. If you bite into an apple just like that, or is even a little bit too soft, it can disgust you out of eating apples for the rest of your life. But you can alleviate this psychological association, if not outright prevent it, by eating another breed of apple. Like, if you bit into a Gala apple first and you found you didn't like that, you could have a Red Delicious instead. Or you could just have a fresh apple if you ate a rotten apple before. The same case can go for media. If you don't like a piece of media, but you happen to like another, the former shouldn't inform your whole opinion about a series or an entire genre or an entire medium. It's that other sense of how a bad apple doesn't spoil the bun. However, it can also be just as unpleasant to eat an unripe apple because clearly it wasn't ready. It could be a comic book too that was made so hurriedly that the panels are, well, they're not drawn all that well. They're sloppy, and the panel arrangement is ass, and the text bubbles are just full of spelling errors. Or it could be a game that's released in early access with all the bugs and glitches that entails. Now, admittedly, this is where the apple analogy kind of falls apart, because, yeah, cooking a piece of meat might be a more comparable thing here. Insert clip of Gordon Ramsay going fucking raw. I guess that's really all I have to say about it. It was definitely more than a quick spiel. It probably took a total of, like, 20 minutes to say everything that I want to say. And I am reading off of a script, so that script took a couple of hours to write. Hopefully, I've laid for you just an array of similarities between literally consuming an apple and studying it and the act of consuming a media or a text or a work. Less literally, don't eat your DVDs, and then critiquing that media. And the most poignant comparison that I can make here at this point is anybody can consume something, but the act of consuming and the act of really looking into the work, those are two different things. Few, I guess, possess the, not intellectual capacity, anybody can be smart, but not everybody thirsts for knowledge or has the spare time necessary to obsess so much over detail that they can just go into a work and study up everything about it. Like Me and the Boys, the Amazon Prime TV adaptation of the comic book by Garth Ennis. It's going to be a subject of my study. Hint, hint. Yeah, I look into everything about it. The cast, the characters, the plot structure, a little bit of how it's made. I can get some insight from cast interviews. Critique is such an important component to understanding art because it allows for that intellectual angle to be taken. So you can enhance your own appreciation of a work, not just by turning your brain off or keeping your brain constantly on. You could even do those things at the same time. It kind of forces you to think more carefully about what you like and what you dislike about art and what you want to see in the creative sphere even. Best part is, it also applies to food, because cooking is also an art. Critique can inspire creativity in and of itself even. You want to make something just because you're somewhat unsatisfied with some level of work, if you like it or dislike it. If you want to do something about it, you could write fan fiction or modify a game to your liking, if you have the know-how. And if watching me made you want to eat an apple, all the better. So yeah, that's my thoughts. Thanks for listening, I guess. I'm gonna finish this apple and maybe chuck it into the woods, let nature take its course. Oh yeah, pro tip to anybody that wants to get a date, get yourself a partner that can eat an apple all the way to the core or clean a chicken bone. They can get shit done.